Just give a couple more minutes for a few more people to join here. Not minutes, seconds.
All right, why don't you jump in the account, give me an account, thumbs up, and you think we're good to go.
Just tell them, give it a few more seconds for some people to hop on.
So, good morning, everybody. We're just waiting a few more seconds just to have other people join us. And I apologize for getting started a little bit late. Trying to do a IG live with Dubai and ran into some technical difficulties going to the other side of the world. Carolyn will not be joining us, so just going to roll with this IG live. It's actually my second IG live on my own. I did one probably almost 3 years ago. So Dr. Sean's doing one on his own. And topic we're going to be talking about is fruit and honey. And I hope to be able to share some insights about fruit and honey and whether you want to consider or what you should consider in thinking about whether you want to either start doing fruit or honey or eliminate fruit and honey from your diet or just to be aware of a few insights. Maybe it's something you want to do down the road. And I'm going to share my own perspective about fruit and honey. I'm going to try to present this as objectively as possible without any of my subjective bias. The nice thing about what I do is I utilize MRI. And so what that means is my subjectivity doesn't really matter. What really counts is what's going on in the individual. So what might happen to me is not necessarily what's going to happen to somebody else, or what happens to somebody else is not necessarily what's going to happen to maybe you. So that's why I call it the ultimate experiment. The N of 1 is seeing what's happening inside your body utilizing MRI. So let me just preface all of my examples that I might be giving. They're examples of what happened in individuals, not necessarily what happened to you. So before a lot of you start thinking, well, you're biased either for or against something, really I am as objective as possible. I work with clients, I work with individuals, studying them, and I tell them, I don't really care what's happening 7.9 billion other people on the planet. What I care about is what is happening to you. And that's what we try to capture in our approach in our particular practice. So you can do the same thing. If you get your own MRI, you can track what's going on. The enlightened woman, the enlightened man will get an MRI, capture what's happening at their baseline, and then follow it for impact to whatever kind of change that they want to do. So if you don't want to change, you can do the same thing and you just simply capture where you're at right now. And if you love what you're doing, then get that MRI and see what's happening. Is it beneficial to you? So I'm going to teach you what you should be looking at in an MRI, and you can also do the same thing with the CT. The downside of the CT is CT uses radiation. So I prefer to use MRI because it uses magnetic fields and no radiation at all. All right, so we're going to be talking about fruit and honey, and we'll go ahead and get started on my first MRI. This is an image that I like to show because it looks, it's an individual in an unhealthy state. So a few biomarkers that you want to pay attention to is fat is not all the same, okay? Some fat is super bad. You do not want to have this fat. And some fat is super good. You want to have it. Now, that is what you should be talking about, those type of fats instead of cholesterol. When you go to your doctor, you should be walking in, that doctor said, I work for you. My job is to make you as healthy as possible. Instead, that's not how the conversation goes. So I want you to be aware of this so you can study it, you can talk to your doctor, maybe persuade them to get an MRI for you. If you're going to pay out of pocket, you're not going to utilize insurance, you're going to pay cash for this. They should not have any objective about it. And always, Dr. Sean is an option for you to consider if you cannot get your doctor to do it. All right, so we're looking at a cross section of an abdomen. Okay, so it's sort of like a slice through here, and that's the belly button. Okay, so everybody knows where their belly button is. This is this guy's belly button, and they're laying on their back. So these are their back muscles. And while we're on the back muscles, they should be all dark because muscles should be dark on an MRI. But look at all those white streaks in there. Okay, that's human marbling. And marbleization is something you want to know if it's going on in your muscles. Because if you get a bunch of marbleized muscles, guess what you ain't going to be doing when you're 80 years old? You're not going to be able to get your butt out of a chair. You're going to need help. So you want to track your muscles to see what's going on. So is fruit and honey affecting the composition of your muscles? Are your muscles lean and free of fat, or are they filled with these white streaks? All right, so visceral fat is one we're going to take a look at, and these myosteatosis in the back muscles we'll take a look at. And these are love handles. So these hang off your back in this area here. And love handles are subcutaneous fat, and it's going to be very important for a discussion of fruit and honey. So you want to look at your love handles, and you want to specifically take a look at the composition of the subcutaneous fat. There are two compartments in subcutaneous fat. It's not all the same. A lot of people just lump it together, including I've seen studies that just lump it all together, but they're like bricks in clouds different, okay, these two compartments. So you have this black line that goes through this compartment, and that's called scarpus fascia, separating subcutaneous fat in two compartments. Well, if it's going to be separated by nature, it's because it's significant, okay? So those two compartments have a name: superficial subcutaneous fat, deep subcutaneous fat. So that's what we're going to be looking at. We're going to try to study the effect and influence that fruit and honey, which are carbohydrates, have on those particular compartments. That's what we're going to be interested in. And when it comes to these two compartments, deep subcutaneous fat behaves like visceral fat and muscle fat, myosteatosis, because they're inflammatory. They release inflammatory molecules, trickle, trickle, trickle. The way I describe these three compartments, they're like three horsemen wearing black hats, okay? Bad guys or bad women. And they all are about the same height, and they've got guns, okay? They don't hurt you any other way except for their guns. Their guns are they're releasing these inflammatory molecules. So that's how you have to think about them, okay? They're guns. If they just rode up and didn't have any guns, be no problem. So what does that mean? We could put that fat, those dangerous inflammatory fat, into your compartments, into your belly, and underneath your skin, into your muscle. And initially, no problem. But the more they shoot, they're like little micro bullets, the more you start falling apart, okay? And you don't want to do that. If it's going on, you want to detect it. So the question for you is, what is honey and fruit doing to you? The answer is, in all probability, going to be very different between individuals. So we're going to try to get into that and explain it. All right, well, let's take a look at a couple examples I've talked about before. This individual is mostly dark. This individual is mostly white. When you are mostly white, heads up, your black is going away. Okay? You do not want that white stuff accumulating here because it shrinks this beautiful black muscle. Okay? So if you don't want to be a sarcopenic individual, really thin and emaciated, then you, like this individual here, if you want to avoid that kind of look as you age, then you got to be tracking what is going on with your muscle, okay? And we're not talking about the outside. Heads up, you're a bodybuilder. You go and lift weights, okay? Then why, when you're 60, 70, 80 years old, if you're massive, why are you losing your muscle? So it's sarcopenia. Could you do a better job? That's what we're talking about, and that's where the MRI is. So the question here for today in this IG Live is, what role does fruit and honey play in that particular issue? All right, so you want to have a layer of superficial subcutaneous fat, a healthy layer of superficial subcutaneous fat. That particular fat that you have in your body is a horseman too, but that horseman has a white hat. They're a good guy or a good girl, and they have a gun, and they shoot their bullets. Don't cause inflammation, don't cause your body fall apart. That shoots a bullet called adiponectin, adiponectin, just like it sounds. Now, the industry, the conventional healthcare system, big pharma, the system that's profiting for your body falling apart, do not want you to know about that. So write it down, adiponectin, study it, and next time you go into the doctor, you say, doctor, I'd like you to help me get some more adiponectin. And he or she won't even know anything about it, chances are. So if they're not willing to research it, figure it out, tell you how to improve it, you probably need a new doctor. But hang out on my page, YouTube, Instagram, X, LinkedIn, and you will learn more about adiponectin, what you got to do to optimize, okay? All right, so you want this thin layer of this stuff because adiponectin is being secreted by that white-hatted guy. Okay, that adiponectin is coming from superficial subcutaneous fat. Superficial subcutaneous fat is a chief resource and source of adiponectin. So, and guess what doesn't have adiponectin is deep subcutaneous fat and also visceral fat. So when it comes to utilizing fruit and honey, one of the things that I've observed, and I'm just looking for a photograph here, but unfortunately I don't see an immediate example of it, so it didn't look like it loaded. But fruitarians, okay? So fruitarians are people that exclusively just eat fruit. And if you're gonna just eat fruit, one of the things that happens over a period of time, you can just Google fruitarians or like vegetarian, people just eat fruit, is they lose superficial subcutaneous fat. They end up not only losing superficial subcutaneous fat, but they also lose muscle mass. Here's what I'm going to say. Adiponectin protects your muscle. It helps to protect you from sarcopenia, the loss of muscle mass. What attacks muscle mass, I told you before, that white stuff, visceral fat and deep subcutaneous fat, okay? So one is helping, the other one is destroying. So what you want to do is you want to have some superficial subcutaneous fat, and you want to have you want none, not almost, no. You want no visceral fat. You want no deep subcutaneous fat. Now, there might be somebody out there who says, well, gee, I kind of want to have my love handles. That would be kind of a bizarre statement. But in certain cases, that would be appropriate when it's mostly subcutaneous fat. When you have mostly superficial subcutaneous fat, then you want to have those love handles. So let me give you an example of what that looks like. So an individual that has an elevated amount of superficial subcutaneous fat and doesn't have a lot of visceral fat would be an example right here. Okay, so this individual, Yumi Nu, I think is the name of her. She's a model. She's got a pretty face, an attractive face, but and she was controversial because she made it to Sports Illustrated magazine swimsuit edition. But let's look at her body. Okay, so interesting. Okay, heavy. She's actually heavy. She's a full-figured lady. Okay. So what's interesting about her now, I don't know for sure because I do not have an MRI scan, but here's what my learned eyes from a lot of experience scanning thousands and thousands of people, looking at faces, looking at bodies. When you come to me, I take photographs of your body, angles, all sorts of measurements. And what I can tell you is I would bet the family farm that Yumi has very low visceral fat. And if we scanned her, she's got a lot of superficial subcutaneous fat. So interesting stuff. Adiponectin, the superficial subcutaneous subcutaneous fat gives you a very healthy looking face. So women, gives you a pretty face. Pretty face. Now, who ends up with an unattractive face is somebody that has a lot of deep subcutaneous fat rather than visceral fat. So let's look at these faces, okay? This is Sinead O'Connor Young. Sinead O'Connor within, I think, a year before she died. And I can tell you that is the influence of deep subcutaneous fat and visceral fat cause an inflammatory change in your face. So let's get back to fruit and honey and see what sort of, at least in some individuals, what happens and the kind of questions that you want to start paying attention to with regard to consuming fruit and honey. All right, so let's take a look at an individual here who has got this particular skin, and we'll just blow it up so it's a little bit bigger. We just saw that individual. They have, believe it or not, visceral fat inside of them. And so it's a pretty sizable amount, all that white stuff in there, but they have beneficial subcutaneous fat. Well, let's look at their body so you have an idea about their body. So their body looks really good, but the time that MRI was taken, that visceral fat, they had an elevated amount of visceral fat in there. So you do not know just by outward appearance whether you got visceral fat. You got to get that MRI to take a look. But here's an individual here, their abdomen, and you can see that they have a six-pack. They have they're very lean, and let's look at their MRI scan. So here's their MRI scan. They have like no visceral fat, and they have like almost no sub-Q fat. I mean, just you can barely see any of that subcutaneous fat. So they're lacking. They're really toadies, thin outside and thin inside, thin outside and thin inside. Okay, so you don't want to be a toady. You really want to be a fody, like Yumi knew. So fat outside and thin inside, and gives that kind of a look. So here's an individual here that has a six-pack. You can see the outline of a six-pack, and we'll look at their inside of them, and they got elevated amount of visceral fat inside of them. So you can't tell by at least from your eyes. I'm learning, I'm pulling it together, and I'm pretty sure our ancestors would have taken a look at how we appear from the outside, because they didn't have an MRI scanner. And grandma or great grandma would have said, "You're in trouble. You're eating too much of this and not enough of that." And maybe it was too much fat, too much meat, too much fruit, different things, and you got to make sure you do it. So here's kind of a surprise look about what's going on the inside. So this is an individual in the Army National Guard with me. I'm going to show you their faces and how much their faces have changed over a period of time as they've changed their diet. Okay, so individual right here is eating kind of a mixed diet, just getting started, going into carnivore, and here they've added back carbohydrates. So do you see the change in that face? And so what happens as you add back carbohydrates, and more importantly, you start accumulating visceral fat, is you get this kind of inflammatory full look to your face. Okay, a very kind of a full, broad, wide, I just call it inflammatory kind of look to your face. And then he cut out carbohydrates, and look at the change in the inflammation that occurred over a period of time. And so that in fact mimics pretty close to what I see in my clients very often, and that is as the face, as visceral fat is eliminated in the face, you will see this inflammatory change in the face change quite a bit as well. And one of the biggest places that it shows up is actually in the face. So I'll show you that in my own picture. If you've never seen it before, this was me with a lot of visceral fat, and then this is me with visceral fat removed. So my subcutaneous fat improved and is optimized. And I used to have a six-pack. I wish I had a particular MRI right at that time, but I bought into, like, Dr. Sean has to look good, and I kind of went along with having a six-pack. I no longer want my clients to have six-packs that you can see. I want my clients to have them by MRI. The only place you should, in my opinion, I'll come out and say it, the only place you want to see a six-pack is on an MRI scan. Why? Because you want to have a layer of that protective superficial subcutaneous fat, that adiponectin creating layer of fat that you get to protect against heart attacks, strokes, obesity, diabetes, neurodegenerative conditions, and obesity in general. Believe it or not, subcutaneous fat protects you against obesity. So I'm just gonna, heads up, taking my shirt off. So I have a healthy shape, but I don't have a six-pack that you can see because I got a layer of subcutaneous fat protecting Dr. Sean, okay? So the new status symbol is not having abs, it's having health. And what's interesting is a lot of particularly women wrote me when I've done reels on superficial subcutaneous fat and liposuction. They admitted that their greatest regret that they have with regard to their health was they got a liposuction and they sucked out superficial subcutaneous fat, limiting their adiponectin. So what happened? A lot of them had deterioration in their health. They got sick more. And this is an interesting thing that they shared. Their faces got less attractive. So I'm going to take you back to the Renaissance period of time with the great masters. And during that time, the Renaissance period, the masters weren't painting thin, anorexic women. They were painting cherubs, cherubic women, full figure. And they would have these very effeminate faces. And they would paint them because they were healthy and they were attractive. And the masters were drawn to those cherub-like faces, and the cherubs, the little angelic children, they're statues and stuff. And children have, for the most part, a very healthy layer of superficial subcutaneous fat. So we think children are cute. They're really not cute. What they are, they're healthy. We want to look at them because they're healthy, not because they're cute. We're attracted to people and we're attracted to humans that are healthy. So I tell my clients, you want to know what you would look like without disease? Look at your kids. And I tell my clients' kids, you want to know what you're going to look like with disease? Look at your parents. Because as they accumulate disease in their body, they change their appearance. All right, so let's bring this back to fruit and to honey. So what you want to do is take a look at the effects that fruit and honey have on your body, and you study it. So everybody's going to be a little bit different. So let's start talking about who should be taking or who can take fruit and honey, and who should avoid it. All right, so let's go back to this individual here. Because they have no visceral fat, they grew up, truth be told, who's that guy? That's my son, okay? My son grew up off carbohydrates. He's one of the only kids in probably the world, certainly in the United States, that was raised without carbohydrates. So he has no visceral fat, and he also has a very healthy microbiome. So one of the problems that you do not hear discussed about people that are promoting fruit and honey and carbohydrate consumption is the impact on visceral fat and the microbiome. The two go hand in hand. You cannot have an informed discussion about visceral fat without having an informed discussion about the microbiome. You have to follow these the two together. They really track, and the microbiome, more than anything else, drives your health. Even more important than visceral fat, because what you see before the black-hatted horsemen show up, your changes in your microbiome. So here's what I think goes on with fruit. If you have a very healthy microbiome that allows you to metabolize carbohydrates and fruit, you can get away with it. My son could start eating a bunch of fruit, and his microbiome would permit him to metabolize it. But somebody else, like this particular individual right here, let's take a look at their abdomen. They're a little bit pudgy. Now let's get real. The majority of you signing in and watching me right now probably are a little bit more closer to this guy, this hombre, than my son, okay? This guy is in his 40s. And now, if we put a shirt on him, he doesn't even have a dad bod. You know, we put a shirt on him, you probably wouldn't notice much. But he does not look like an obese person. But check out the inside. Woo! Look at all that visceral fat. Just firing away. That visceral fat is releasing all these molecules, destroying this guy. He's only 42 years old, and that belly is just going to get bigger and bigger and bigger, and his muscles are going to start falling apart. He's going to get sarcopenia, and he's going to end up with erectile dysfunction. You know, so you do not want to have that going on. So this guy, no way would I advocate this guy add in fruit and honey, because he has fed the bears. The bears have come into the camp. They feed on bad human food, okay? The only place you really see unhealthy bears are in national parks and around suburbs where they get into trash cans and eat the crappy food that humans eat. Otherwise, they're healthy, okay? So you want to eat a species-specific diet, and I advocate, you know, meat, fat, and protein to be able to do that. And if you got an abdomen filled with visceral fat, you have any periods of obesity in your lifetime that you maybe even have recovered from. I recommend to hold the line and do not return to carbohydrates, and because I have yet to find a human being that just eats, you know, fat and protein, you know, carnivore their whole life and ends up with obesity. Let's face it, every example of obesity, bad pathogenicity, includes a substantial period in their life of consuming carbohydrates, okay? So just try the world's ultimate elimination diet. I'm not telling you to eat this way for the rest of your life. Just give it a try, okay? If you're on the verge, you're vegetarian, you're fruitarian, you're vegan, you're eating the Mediterranean diet, whatever. Give the carnivore diet a try. Do a baseline MRI and see what happens to you. Now, I recommend something else, okay? I am a carnivore physician. I'm a meat eater. I promote eating the healthiest meat possible. Not supermarket meat, not going in and eating anything. Let's use our brains. You want to be eating meat from the healthiest animal that you select from the herd, okay? So you go in that supermarket case. If you're going to eat supermarket meat and you're traveling or whatever, then you go in and you pick just like the Native Americans did. They didn't hunt like lions and tigers, the easiest, like the older animal or the calf. You know, Native Americans hunted the very best one from the silhouette of that animal and the sheen of its coat. Okay, they could tell. They knew what was healthy meat. You don't know. You're eating ribeye with all mastocytosis, marbleization. Your muscles all marbleized. You know, you're following social influencer. Eat really fatty meat. I eat fatty meat on a healthy animal. You know, so I eat an animal that's super healthy, does not have marbleization going on in that. So marbleization always goes with visceral adiposity. So when we see these marbleized muscles, visceral fat, and some carbohydrates, okay? So try going on the ultimate elimination diet, just eat meat. The other thing where I'm a little different is I add in microbes, okay? I'm not, for the purposes, you know, it's ferments. I'm gonna avoid adding the second word, food. Don't think of it as food. Think of it as microbes. When I advocate to my clients eating a small amount of fermented foods, okay? So it's a garnish, kind of like, you know, a steak. If you were a crazy kid, you ate steak and a little ketchup on it. You know, you want a little garnish. You don't need much. Why? Because they're microbes. How much microbes do you need to get the flu? Right? So what you want to get is a good infection. Okay, so add in these good microbes into you, and take a look. And you know, I'm just going to do this podcast. You know, the IG Live with Carolyn Boucheray, and we ran into technical difficulties. Carolyn's got a very attractive body. This lady is, look at that, great shape of her body, great shape of her legs, very nice, elegant arms, very attractive face, very, very gorgeous hair. Reminds me of Brooke Shields when she's 18. Carolyn Boucheray is 59 years old, rocking it. So, you know, big insight, why she looks so good is her MRI. She's mostly dark on the inside. She does not have visceral fat, and she's got a nice layer of superficial subcutaneous fat. Now, I'd advocate, you know, increasing that a little bit more, just a little bit more on Carolyn, just a little bit more. But, you know, because she is a model and she's well compensated, and maybe the audience is driving towards that. But there was a day our ancestors would have been driving Carolyn towards having a little bit more superficial subcutaneous fat. But, you know, I will say, to knuckles to Carolyn, she has almost no visceral fat. Now, here's the take-home point. Carolyn looks the way she does today because she's never had visceral fat. She's never accumulated it. So what does that mean? She's the pretty girl in the class that has always been pretty, always been attractive. Her whole life, my guess is if I looked at her photo album or her mother's or father's photo album with Carolyn, you would see that Carolyn enjoyed a level of attraction throughout her whole life because she consumed a low carbohydrate diet. She went Atkins and her family a long time ago when Atkins was popular, but unlike the OMara family, when I grew up and my parents went on the Atkins diet, my parents abandoned it, and Carolyn stayed away from carbohydrates. So that's what you wanted. What I recommend doing. Now, if you have, like my son, if you're in that position where you're super lean, you have very low levels of subcutaneous visceral fat, and your microbiome, you haven't grown up eating carbohydrates, and you've got an intact, healthy microbiome, you could consider adding in fruit. But it's not like when you add in fruit, it's going to make you look better. You know, it's just an added choice that you have to do. But if you're going to do that, please pay attention to the impact, because it may lead to other things. It may. So some people just hang right in there with fruit and honey. And I will come out and say that to me is far more sensible than adding in other forms of carbohydrates. But here's what happens to individuals that end up having, you know, that kind of body like this, like that I get clients. Now, some of them, you know, Dr. Paul Saladino, smart guy. He's smarter than me. He is. He's smarter than me. But I think he's wrong. I don't want to advocate everybody do these things. He is a promoter of fruit and honey as though, you know, it's a beneficial thing for everybody. Here's what happened to several of my clients. They got persuaded by Paul and kind of got in there. It was almost like cancer metastases spread to other people. And they started with fruit and honey. And then pretty soon they were eating candy and tortillas and bread. Okay? So what happened? Their microbiome, they have a disrupted microbiome, and they fed the bears. And the bears came in and it spread other things. So it can evolve to other things. Now, if you're like my son is not eating fruit and he's not eating honey, but he could. If you have that kind of level of health and you introduce, natural sources of carbohydrates from fruit and vegetables, and you do not have visceral fat, you do not have a disrupted microbiome, there is, at least I wonder, the possibility to maybe even probability, I would go out to say, that you could consume those without contributing to visceral adiposity, visceral fat, deep subcutaneous fat. You won't get a fat face. So in the case of Paul Saladino, let's look at Paul. Paul, I won't pull up his face, but he provides an interesting individual to talk about. Paul has a lean look to his face, and he recently did a post a few months ago where he had a DEXA scan that showed low levels of visceral fat. Now, I did not like the interpretation from that young lady who was not a physician. She claimed it's low level of visceral fat, and I'd like to, push back a little bit and say, what do you call fat? How much have you been evaluating visceral fat? Here's the answer. I don't want low. I want none, because I don't want anybody shooting up my body, okay? I want my body, I'm 61 years old. I want to preserve this body, and if I look like I'm healthy, I hardly exercise. I exercise, about 15 minutes on average, about every other day. I mean, I hardly exercise. Paul's out there 3 hours, surfing. And here's the interesting thing: have you ever seen a dedicated surfer that's surfed their whole life? If you're a surfer, and I'm a surfer, I grew up surfing. I spent all my money on surfboards. All the excess money that I got, and so I know what it's like. It's like an addiction. You just got to be out there. Have you ever seen a fat surfer? Not really. What's going on there? Here's my theory. The microbiome. They're in that water. They wipe out. They drink that water. They're contributing the living microbes in the ocean water into their microbiomes, and it's helping to protect them. So a big interesting observation nobody's talking about, Paul Saladino, I think it's his ocean water. Now this Paul never wipes out, and he's doesn't get a drop of that ocean water. I think it's his microbiome, and he's also talking about ferments. All right, so I've lectured enough, talked to you about it. What I'm advocating is nobody really knows. We haven't done large numbers of studies. I've warned you who should not be trying fruit and honey are people that have had periods of obesity, look like my clients. I've warned who could consider trying it, people who look more like my son and have a very robust microbiome and have no visceral fat. And what about Dr. Sean? No, I am not going to do it because I am formerly obese, heavy set, disrupted microbiome, and I'm just not going to go there. I love my life. I'm not going to take the chance that I'm going to get a bad infection. They're going to drive me towards eating tortillas and bread and pasta and all sorts of craziness and ice cream that I formerly did. So regardless of where you're at, get an MRI and see what's going on and follow it. And if you're at a point where you're at crossroads and you're thinking about adding in a fruit or honey, or you want to eliminate fruit, honey, and see what's going on, then get that MRI and baseline and repeat in 3 months. All right, well, let's, how about we take for the next 10, 15 minutes some questions, and I appreciate if you hung in this long that you join me about this, and I hope it leads to an interesting discussion. You share it with other people so they think about it, and I'm not an anti-fruit person, okay? I am just throwing some light and some content into this discussion about carbohydrates. The truth is, I'm not even an anti-carbohydrate individual here. Now, I do really limit my carbohydrates, but I'll be realistic. I eat carbohydrates. Where do I eat it? In my meat, glycogen, okay? And I eat liver, lots of carbohydrates, like 60 grams of carbohydrates when I'm eating my liver, okay? So it's not like I process my liver to get rid of carbohydrates. But I believe animal source of carbohydrates and meat is better, not milk. I do not recommend those carbohydrates. I put posts on lactose and the introduction that had in me where it caused my deep subcutaneous fat, my visceral fat to increase because of those extra carbohydrates. So I recommend animal carbohydrates in the form of dairy, lactose, be fermented to eliminate those carbohydrates. All right, well, let's take some questions. I have my assistant, John, here, and John fielded some questions. So let's see what sort of interesting questions we may have. John?
Does low GI fruit contribute to visceral fat as much as high GI fruit?
So the question went to low GI fruit, and I assume they mean glycemic index versus not gastrointestinal. So glycemic index, fruit that's higher, yeah, it will be a higher amount of carbohydrates. It will have no significant difference if you have a really robust microbiome and you can metabolize the fructose and the sugar that is in the fruit. The other thing I meant to mention is the sources of your fruit. Okay, so the fruit today is all hybridized, not to make it healthy. I mean, if you're a CEO of Chiquita, okay, some fruit company, your motivation is like, God, I get up in the morning and I think, how can I get my consumers that eat a lot of fruit and bananas to be more healthy? No, you're thinking about your performance bonus. You're thinking about how much money you can make and get, for your shareholders, okay? And that is not going to come from eating funny looking, bad tasting fruit. It's going to come in from really tasty fruit. And so you got men and women eating grapes. Now they put them in bags in supermarkets. And so from really sweet. So I recommend eating wild fruit, okay? I will admit, I will occasionally eat some wild fruit, but the fruit I eat, wild. I mean, these grapes are astringent, they're sour, they're so tiny, but they got interesting, they got wildness on them. They got interesting microbes, flies are landing on all sorts of bugs landing on them. And when I've eaten those things, TMI, when I go to the bathroom, and we're not talking number one, okay, we're talking number two, a very interesting, pleasant, wonderfully pleasant smell comes out from me from that microbiome. So wild fruit, less sweet, lower GI is preferable, but if you have a really robust microbiome, you'll be able to handle that. So if you're in between, you're not so sure, not so confident, I would avoid the higher glycemic index fruit. Very interesting question. Thank you for submitting it.
David asks, for those with young children, like pre any type of MRI, would you recommend giving fruits and honey to kids?
Yeah, so David had an interesting question. What about fruit and honey introduced into your children? Here's what I recommend. I would recommend if you got a baby to not give them fruit and honey. Now, the pediatricians recommend starting with vegetables before you add in fruit, because if you start with fruit, then they don't want to eat the vegetables. Okay, so that happens. I just say skip that fruit. Get that baby. When that baby is 1 year old, most people put them in a high chair and they put a cake on with beautiful colors and a candle and everybody's clapping, like encouraging that kid to eat sweet, colorful things. Okay, put a piece of meat in front of that kid and let that kid, chew on some meat and some fermented food. Okay, some kimchi, some carrot, fermented carrots, and get those macros, or just put it on that piece of meat for that kid to do it. So absolutely not. I do not recommend, I recommend meat and fermented. What's the difference? You can ferment fruit, by the way. Fermented vegetables, fermented foods, fermented fruit eliminates the carbohydrates, okay? The chemical process is called reduction, okay? So it ferments and it consumes the carbohydrates and leaves all the nutrient value. And with regard to vegetables, it eliminates, to the extent it is adequately fermented, oxalates and lectins and some of these objectionable microtoxins that carnivore physicians and carnivore influencers are educated about and concerned about and trying to share with other people. Maybe we should not be eating vegetables. And I get, how that was for me. When a friend told me he went carnivore, I was like, that's the craziest thing in the world. You got to eat vegetables. So now I just eat them fermented. Eat your fruit fermented. I would not give a kid fruit unless it's fermented to allow them to have that benefit. So thank you, David. Very interesting question.
Deborah's asking, does the same apply to raw honey?
Okay, so yeah, so raw honey is better. Organic honey is better. Natural honey is better, but it doesn't mean that it's safe to eat, that you can start doing it. It's a little bit like what's really akin to that glycemic index, okay? So raw honey or natural organic honey is better, but it doesn't mean that it's safe and you can eat it. So if you look like my client here, no way, Jose, am I going to say, all right, you can eat that honey just as long as it's raw. No, it's the sugars. It is that fructose that's present in there that is the problem. So for sure, if you are going to be adding in honey, I would recommend it be raw, that it be natural, that it be organic, that you get yourself a really, really great source of honey. But do not believe or think that just because it's raw and natural and organic, that you're not going to have an issue or problem with it.
David's asking about, is there an acceptable portion that you eat each week of honey or sweet fruits?
Yeah, so again, that goes to quantity. If you're somebody like my son, has no visceral fat and super microbiome, you could eat a little bit more of it than somebody who has a smaller amount. But I would recommend somebody that looks more like, they can't eat any honey at all, but somewhere between my son and maybe a tad closer to this guy. Okay, so I would be starting with a smaller amount, okay, for sure, because there's a linear relationship to those carbohydrates. Nobody gets themselves in a period of obesity if they eat a modest amount of carbohydrates, a moderate amount of sugar. But let's face it, for the majority of you, you've had a period of being overweight and obese, and it was from an excessive amount. So smaller, in this case, smaller is better, for sure. And so I would start a very, very small amount. And I'd ask you, if you're going to start this thing, what are you hoping to achieve? What do you hope you're going to get out of it? So you should track that, and of course, you should be tracking the potential harm in the form of visceral fat forming, deep subcutaneous fat forming, or muscle fat forming, and your face. Take photographs. If you cannot afford an MRI, for darn sure, take pictures of your face, okay, and see what's happening. I like the fact that my face is very lean. I mean, I'll do an analysis on my face. Now, nobody's going to mistake me for being 16 years old, but the shape of my face has more of a teenager or 20-year-old face versus that former inflamed face where it was big. And most older people, and I think I have a photograph, of this to be able to give an example. Most older people, as they age, start to get jowls, an inflamed kind of look, and deep nasal labial creases. My nasal labial creases are disappearing. They're softening. I'll stop talking to show them. Okay, so when I smile, they come back, and when I start talking. But these creases are interesting. So track your face and see the impact of adding in fruit and what's happening, and taking away fruit. So you can have that as a measurement. And what I see in Paul is it looks like his face is losing some of that subcutaneous fat, some of that kind of a quality cherub-like effect. Let me see if I can. So in the Renaissance period, if I blow up this face, do you see that beautiful kind of a chubby like look to their face? So it's an attractive look, and you want to have some subcutaneous fat. Older people have like no subcutaneous fat. They have like a million wrinkles and this gaunt kind of hollowed look, very thin skin. And you don't want to have that. You know, these people will come into the ER, very, very thin skin, no subcutaneous fat. They trip over a curb, they rip their arm, big huge cut, right through the skin, and you're staring at muscle because they don't have any subcutaneous fat. So it looks to me like if I did an MRI on Paul before and after he started consuming the fruit, that he's losing some of his subcutaneous fat. And Paul's got some healthy vasculature, doesn't he? I mean, his veins are popping, all right? But he looks like he's losing a lot of that subcutaneous fat. And, you know, you get an 80-year-old, you see a lot of veins popping out of an 80 and 90-year-old because they don't have any of that subcutaneous fat. So what you want to have is that healthy, you know, vascularity present and superficial subcutaneous fat concealing. So it's a little bit like, you know, six-pack, but you know, not quite as much. I really do not believe you want to have a six-pack that you can see from the outside, only on an MRI.
How long does it take to rehabilitate a carb body?
Carbohydrate body? All right, so the question is, basically another way to summarize that is, how long will it take to recover? If you're somebody that ate a lot of carbohydrates, maybe you became obese, maybe you became heavy, how long is that going to take? And my clients always ask me, we do these MRI scans, we show them, they're like, how long am I looking at this, okay? So the answer is, everybody's going to be different. How long did it take for that to develop? That's the question. So if you developed over a long period of time, lots of micro bullets, okay, lots of those gunshot wounds, you have damage. So the answer is kind of bad news. It's going to take you longer to recover, but surely you will. Cut out those carbohydrates, get rid of your visceral fat, get rid of myosteatosis, get rid of deep subcutaneous fat. Your body has a remarkable, it's a brilliant machine. It wants to recover you. So the short answer is everybody's different, and to the extent that you successfully eliminate those three black-hatted horsemen, and you optimize your microbiome, you will accelerate your recovery. But if you're poor at that, it's like, well, you know, I'm just going to cut back on my pizza. I'll just eat one donut instead of 6. Well, you're going to slow down your capacity to recover. So get motivated, get disciplined, and you'll get faster results.
Similar, does age have a bearing on how long it takes to eliminate visceral fat?
Okay, so what role does age play in the elimination of visceral fat? So I'll just tell you, for the most part, probably none. It doesn't have anything to do with age. What it has to do with is disease. Okay, so if you are like Carolyn, if we dumped, like if I surgically opened her up and put a bunch of visceral fat in her, and I left her to her own devices, like her own lifestyle choices to get rid of that visceral fat, she's going to get rid of it faster than another man or woman that I put an equal amount of that visceral fat into their body because of the level of health. How healthy you are, and specifically how healthy your microbiome is what is going to be your resource to get rid of that visceral fat. So instead of thinking about, according to your age, think about how healthy you are. And don't get discouraged. If you're super unhealthy and you're laying there right now eating ice cream on a couch, you're morbidly obese, you're 500 pounds, and you got this strange attraction to watch these healthy channels when you're, my 500-pound life, kind of a person. Don't be discouraged. You certainly can reclaim your health and get it back. But, you know, make no mistake about it, you know, time is running out for some people. There are men and women on this planet right now, hopefully nobody listening to me, they're going to drop dead of a heart attack tomorrow. They're going to be dead. And so you need to be thinking about, not from a fear-mongering perspective, but some people, you know, don't have the luxury of slow recovery. They really need to turn themselves around. So I call it a light switch when you make your decision to optimize your health. Get serious about your health. Don't, you know, dip your toe into a pool and say, well, I'm just going to try this health thing out and maybe get a little bit healthy. You know, you may not have that. So really understand your body is your most important physical asset. Your most important asset, in my opinion, is your soul, because listen, we're not just here for, you know, existence on earth. I'm not a great theologian. My calling is to evangelize people when it comes to health. But your body is your most important physical asset. And if you take care of that body, you will have an amazing life, because it's going to define how much you're going to enjoy or suffer future circumstances in your life ahead. And all the money in the world, you cannot buy your health once you've lost it. You get, you know, you stroke out, you look like this in diapers, and by the way, it's the #1 killer, heart attacks and strokes. So I'm not fear-mongering. I'd rather have anything else other than a stroke, because I do not want to be laying in bed, gurgling, you know, grunting, because I can't speak, and I want to understand my wife and my beautiful children, and hopefully beautiful grandchildren and great-great-grandchildren ahead, because Dr. Sean's going to live a long time. I want to understand them when they come and talk to me, and you know, I don't want to have lost my brain. So respect your body and put that effort and initiative into it. All right, maybe one more question. If anybody, well, maybe we better stop, because I see we're over our time already. So if you have any other questions, you can send it to me. I want to thank you for allowing me to do my very second IG and YouTube live that I've ever done. Maybe we certainly do other lives with Carolyn LaBoucherie, because she is just awesome. And I'll do a shout out to her. If you don't know Carolyn, you should get to know her. Follow her and check her out, and I'll do some more lives with her. And you can believe that I will definitely do some more lives myself. I look forward to doing this. Lots of changes coming up with my page and my channel. We're going to be doing more shows. We're going to do more productions, and we're going to be going on the road. And we're expanding, because there are just way too many people. I cannot take care of everybody who wants to work with me. So I'm developing relationships with other doctors. So we are going to be expanding to St. Louis, Missouri. We're going to be expanding to Chicago. We are expanding to 10 other states in the next 2 months. So very exciting how much growth is surrounding visceral fat and visceral fat awareness and health optimization. So please continue to follow me, share my content with other people, help other people to become aware of this. All right, well, thank you very much. If you hung in the whole time for this, really appreciate it, and we will see you guys on some more IG and YouTube lives with Dr. Sean.